Welcome, Leah.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, it is lovely to see you, and it's great to have you here. I'm going to kick off sharing a little bit about Leah and her background. Leah is an artist, writer, and master creativity coach who works with world-class artists and visionaries. I love that because she is a world-class artist and visionary herself. She is the host of the Art School podcast. If you haven't listened to that, I encourage you to do so. Such great inspiration and conversation. And also founder of the Art School, both which she created to help creatives thrive and achieve seemingly impossible dreams. Leah is joining us tonight from her beautiful farm home in Michigan, where she lives with her husband and 3 amazing children. I am a former attendee of the Art School and Art School alum. It was an amazing experience. I've known Leah for a long time. I feel blessed to call you friend. And please, I know you have so much wisdom to share and the audience is curious tonight. So we're glad to turn it over to you. Just in terms of housekeeping reminders, if everyone can stay on mute. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. The call will be recorded, but the chat will not. So your questions in the chat will remain private. Okay, with that, Leah, take it away.
Thank you, Monica. And I first want to thank Monica, who is a dear, beloved friend of mine, and then also Monica Smith and Joni and the Revel 11 team for this opportunity to speak with you this evening. And this invitation to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is creativity. And I refer to it as creativity with a capital C. It's that creativity that, to me, is an inherent part of our human experience and is available to all humans. To me, creativity with a capital C is that energy which, once you tap into it, it carries with it the essence of who you really are. And so what I wanted to be sure to share with you tonight is a little bit of what is my functional philosophy around creativity. Because I think in the past, sometimes creativity can get brushed under the rug, either as like, oh, it's for a certain class of people, like those people that are quote unquote artists, or it's indulgent, or it's, just something that's superfluous if you are not like a working artist. But again, to me, creativity is a life force that once you tap into that vein, you experience a renewed energy and magic in your life, just a renewed sense of being fully alive that is an innate part of being human. And without tapping into that vein, it's almost like you've been breathing your whole life like with one lung, and then you discover that there is this other vein of energy available to everyone. And it's like the whole world opens up. You can take a deep breath. You're oxygenated again. And so it was really important to me to, over time, and I still am in the process of developing what is a functional philosophy, because I love to study. I love to be a student of life. And at the end of the day, though, I'm also pragmatic. I'm a farm girl from Iowa. I grew up on a working farm, like the daughter of farmers, the granddaughter of farmers. And that very much informed my upbringing, both in terms of, I would call them my spiritual and intuitive and mystical link to creativity, that wide open space and sacred country there in the heartland of the Midwest. And also there's a pragmatism there. And with time, I felt like I began to appreciate those two aspects about myself, that something at the heart of what I do, the heart of this functional philosophy, it's very important to me to integrate the pragmatic with the spiritual. And I think of creativity as a capital C. It is a spiritual approach for me. And even if words and concepts like God, don't resonate with you, you can think of it as life force. You can think of it as that which animates the spirit, the life force that animates all of us. And so if it's not spiritual for me, it's not pragmatic. And if it's not pragmatic for me, it's not spiritual. And the beginning of my young adult life and most of my formal educational training was very much more in traditional, conventional realms. I was a finance and international business undergraduate. and I didn't want to be an investment banker. So I thought, well, I'll go to law school. And I had some idealistic notions. I had things that have come full circle now that I wanted to do with law school. But ultimately, it was in those two places where I had this rigorous analytical training in very, traditional environments that really made made my longing to be creative very pronounced. Because at that time, I heard a lot of, well, you can, be a lawyer and then have an art studio on the weekend. And I was soon discovering in law school that up until that point in my life, I could really manage both worlds. The law school was very demanding. Legal career afterwards was very demanding. And a beloved mentor of mine, a judge that I interned for, who was very supportive, did tell me, the law is a jealous mistress. And I could quickly see that creativity was too important to me to be, sidelined to the weekends, that this was really a central part in my life. So I graduated from law school with a real JD, but I didn't feel like a real lawyer. And I graduated feeling like I was a real artist, even though I had no art to show for it. And I decided to honor that call to explore creativity and create art, because I felt that I had never felt anything so real in my life as this desire to create art and to live in the world in such a way. Whereas I mentioned in a video I created for Revel 11 this morning, I remember being a law student in my study cubby and just writing in the margins of my legal pad as I was outlining a case that, I just desire a life. I feel like I'm being called to a life that allows me to pay deep attention to the world, to pay close attention to the world. And I could see a path through being an artist as that and through a writer. And now it's definitely the work I do as a coach as well. Spending time deep listening, paying deep attention to the dreams and the desires and the life in the words of my clients. And so I decided to honor that calling that felt so real. And I just wanted to offer that as a little bit of a background, a preface, so you kind of understand where I'm coming from and why it was important to me to create a functional philosophy, because I didn't just want to have an idea of being an artist. And it also wasn't okay for me to be a broke, tortured, starving artist. Like, I wanted to be able to replace my legal income and to contribute to my family and to have freedom and stability. And I didn't want to agree to the notion that that couldn't be done. I wanted to find a way that it could be done. And so the philosophy that I have come to formulate that is at the heart of the art school and my own personal creative philosophy is this. It's that by cultivating an extraordinary way of being in mind, body, and spirit, we can make the extraordinary results we dream of inevitable. So this process is then not only about what you were creating, the ultimate end goal, but it is about who you are becoming along the way. It's about how you become and how you create, because it's really important to me. And it's become even more so, given that most of the people that I work with are women and are very high achieving, brilliant, talented women. And with so much that they've already created and amazing lives, who still feel like they have dreams and potential inside of them, but they're kind of at a crossroads because they know what it's taken to create the success and the lives that they have so far, and they're spent and they're tired and they're scared that if they allow for the further desires and dreams of their heart to be known and go for it, they're really scared that it'll just plow them over, that they won't have it in them. And so they pull back on those dreams and desires. And I just sensed there was another way. And maybe you have experienced that too, where you can work hard, you can grind, you are an overachiever. That is not in question. It's, do I really want to put myself through that? And I was really tired of being met this place and that with people saying, well, you are going to have to sacrifice. It's either like your soul or it's the money is really kind of at the heart of it a lot of times, or it's your family, or it's your career. And I thought there just must be a better way. And what started to emerge to me was that there's so much more room for what I think of as an integrated, and that means integrating what's typically thought of as like the archetypes of masculine and feminine, much more room for the feminine and how we create. Because we all are familiar, and I'm sure many of my successful audience members here, and I see many of my beloved art schoolers here, so hello, thank you. I know you know how to work, and I know you know how to work for others. And so it's really though how to unleash and tap into this creativity that still resides inside of you and create it in the world in a way that doesn't tear you down, that doesn't require that then you sacrifice what's most dear for you on some warped altar of achievement, because that to me is not the dream. I talk a lot with my art school about the sacred twin intentions. And it's something that I came up with to guide myself after law school when I decided that I was going to pursue art, first while I was still working as a lawyer and then full-time, because I quickly was discovering that I was about to make myself as miserable on this path towards being an artist as I had been in law school. And so I decided right then and there that there was a decision to be made and a commitment to be made, and one that I want to adhere to and do my best to practice the rest of my life. And that is that this is first and foremost, whatever I'm creating is first and foremost about my evolution as a human being. It is first and foremost about me building my soul in the world. And if I have some concept of the dream that looks like I am somehow tearing down my personhood or my soul, then it must not be the dream. And it's time for me to pause and call back the dream. And it's why I talked, and in my promotional materials for this event too, it's so important for me to talk to women and creatives about having your dream and doing it on your terms. And
I want to interrupt you for a second there and give you a minute to pause, because you're sharing so much great information and everyone is loving it. I think what you're talking about there is so important, and I really like what you said about, while you were, ruminating about this and, hey, could I pursue art? People were giving you advice, keep your law degree, keep your law job, and just do your little art thing on the side, right? Just make that secondary, because the belief is there is only one way to earn a living. There's only one way to create an income. There is only one way that is validated with the title and the ladder and all of the things that go with it, right? So I love that you said, how do I shift that? How do I make that core?
Yes. Because I feel like that's the question that if you don't answer, keeps a lot of people from pursuing their dreams and going forward, is this fear that that their dream is wonderful, but it somehow is going to be unsustainable. And so I wanted to first, before I knew I wanted to be a coach, I obviously wanted to find out what was a sustainable approach for myself. And then once I found that, and then I fell in love with coaching and this world of coaching and mindset work, but also like the holistic approach, the body and spirit, the energetic work as well. I became very passionate about teaching it to other people too, because to me, there's like so much liberation available to us, and also so much potential in the world within artists and women yet it's just waiting there, and the world is waiting for it. And so why not have a functional philosophy that helps people access and tap into this innate gift, creativity, that all humans have, and teaches them how to access it in a way that we all can do. Part of it is mystical, and it's absolutely accessible, and also it's functional. It elevates every aspect of your life. And so what I wanted to share tonight is, because one of the phrases I use a lot is, if you can imagine it, you can achieve it. And maybe you can hear like there's a little comma there, like if you can imagine it, comma, you can achieve it. And those are one of those phrases that I absolutely know is true and believe in and adhere to. And I also am very familiar with my own journey, and oftentimes struggle with that comma, with that space between imagining it and then achieving it or creating it. And I've become very well acquainted and have so much compassion for my clients and my audience's experience with that comma, with that space between imagining it and achieving and creating it. So I'm like, okay, we are smart, brilliant, magnificent human beings. We have this miraculous mind and this life here. We surely can figure this out. We can surely figure out how to bridge that space for more and more and more of us until we do what I call it, like normalizing the extraordinary, where we normalize becoming humans who can tap into our potential and bridge that space between imagining it and achieving it. And it doesn't have to be heavy, and it doesn't have to be burdensome, and it doesn't have to tear you. It can, and it's available to you, light you up, bring you life, feel generative, feel joyful, feel simple, right? You can learn how to, even in the chaos that is sometimes the creative process, even in the confusion that sometimes marks stepping into the unknown of the creativity, you can also experience such a clarity of your spirit and a strength of your own mind that you know there's also a simple path forward. And so again, those three main concepts that I wanted to share with you tonight are something called the moonshot goal, the moonshot dream. I have a podcast all about this. I think people have told me it's one of my signature podcast episodes. The second concept I wanted to talk with you about is spaciousness. To me, this is a very exciting aspect of creativity, a very feminine aspect of creativity. And one of the reasons it's so exciting is because it is actually by nourishing yourself, doing less, that you're able to create more and also feel more of an uplift in your life. And the third concept, really two together, but they go well together, I call dropping the drag and nurturing the numinous. So I'll start with I'll start with the moonshot, because that will help create a container for everything else that we're talking about. And I talk a lot in my work and with my clients
please get off there.
About the importance of creating a container. And we'll talk about this more with spaciousness, but containers are so important for me because magic and creativity love a container. And that can look many different ways, but the energy of creativity, it wants to flow, it wants a channel, and it wants a space. And too often this is like a neglected part, is the creating the container. We just want to make things happen without asking ourselves first, have we created the kind of container, I call it even a sacred container, that magic and creativity love and thrive and flourish in. One way of creating a powerful container is what I call the moonshot process. So the moonshot is actually a term, referring back to the space race when there was, the competition between the US and the USSR to put a man on the moon. Because who would have thought back then that that was actually something you could do? Hurl a human being at the end of a fire stick, like into outer space, and then land them on the moon. Talk about a seemingly impossible goal. And then since that time, that moonshot, it connotes a seemingly impossible goal. And the power of a seemingly impossible goal is not just in the result, not just in getting the man to the moon, but it's how it changes your thinking in the process, which is what any artistic creative process can do. And this creative process applies whether you think of yourself as a traditional artist or whether you are just willing to embrace your own creativity with a capital C as a human being. Because giving yourself a moonshot, something that seems out of reach for you, so out of reach that, but your heart desires it, something within you speaks to it, just the way, for me, graduating from law school when I had no art, but felt like a real artist, that to me then was a moonshot goal. That to me, that creating a living as a working artist seemed as distant as like landing on the moon. I didn't know my grandmother had been an art teacher, her second career in life, but I didn't know anybody that was that seemed to me to be like the world of New York City. And I will just say again, I wasn't making art at the time. But one of the gifts in it was that it did invite me to this process that called me to have these deep soul searching conversations and ask the big questions, including, who am I? How could it be that something in me feels so strongly that I'm an artist? Why would that be there if there weren't some truth to that? And I felt like that dream of being an artist, and not one that just makes art, but one that makes art. Here's something else I wrote down in law school, like in my little cubby when I should have been studying. I want to make art that turns not only heads, but turns souls. Like, I didn't tell too many people that at the time because they're like, okay, what does that mean? But it's just something like, what does that mean? I can either dismiss that dream or I can acknowledge it as sacred. And so that's what I want to invite all of you to do, is any dream that is calling you, any desire that's calling you, it could be small. I often talk with my clients about really tune into those things that often seem even frivolous. Those are great gateways to the sacred and the numinous and the magical and to what wants to happen. And also tune into those things where you're like, I can't even fathom a life where that would be. I wouldn't recognize my life. I wouldn't recognize myself, because one of the powers of a moonshot is that you are asked to re-examine and ask that question again. Who am I? Who am I? And one of my art school alum said once that, in other places in the world, that question, who do you think you are, is a red light, but in the art school, it's a green light. Who do you think you are? And using your moonshot, a seemingly impossible goal, dream, or desire, as a mirror out in front of you that mirrors some sacred truth within, and to honor that.
Leah, I'm going to interject for a moment. So for those of you admiring the beautiful roses behind me, that is a piece of Leah's art. So when she says, that she couldn't imagine making art and she didn't have art, it's something you truly, walk the walk and talk the talk. And I love that about you. I think also, clearly, you had a really tight vision of what you wanted. And one of the questions in the chat that I think is applicable to that is, when you've got that vision, how do you take the pressure off of yourself to produce great art and just enjoy the process of making art in the moment? Do you want to talk about that now, or does that come in later?
No, that's a great, it's perfect now. And I'm sure we'll be able to go further, more nuances later. I love that question. Thank you so much for asking. And you are not alone. Like, that comes up a lot. So I mentioned briefly before the sacred twin intention, because that was something I was encountering at the beginning. I had this big vision, and then I created with it so much pressure that I was leaving no space for the joy. And so that's when I had that conversation with myself about my commitment to a simultaneous intention. So when I say sacred twin intention, the first intention being that dream of being an artist, and the second intention, simultaneous to it, equal to it, being that in the process of that, I would be happier as a person. In law school, I really struggled with depression. I struggled a lot with very difficult depression. And that scared me. I didn't want to put so much pressure on myself that I didn't want to live, right? Like that was a very real and imminent thing. And I thought this process, I felt like that dream was calling me, or it was calling me not to abuse me, but to heal me. And so one of the things I teach, because I had to learn it myself, was that your dreams and your goals are for you, and they're not something to use against yourself. So that was a question that I asked myself over and over again. Am I using this dream for me, to bring me joy, to help me tap into my creativity, to help me tap into my potential? Or am I using this goal or dream just as like this measuring stick that I will, like, I can just keep moving it out. I can just look at how far I have to go and then use that distance to like flagellate myself with. So it was why coaching became so important to me. And before I found coaching, I was really interested in sports psychology because I was a competitive triathlete. And that was kind of my foray into positive psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, like this whole world of using your mind to change your brain. And I decided I wanted to rewire and build my mind. I wanted to cultivate my mind to be one that was very kind to me. And that is a very moment by moment process. I wanted to cultivate thoughts and energy and emotions within me that made my inner environment very kind and loving and hospitable, because it's that kind of inner creative ecosystem in which the seeds of your creativity, which I think are God seeds, can flourish, can take root. And so it's a reaction that we're conditioned to, that if you have any great dream, it's almost like it comes in before you realize it. Oh, this is going to mean a lot of pressure. I even watched it preparing and, and leading up to this event. But it's the benefit of, I have really practiced for years. And also I want to say that it doesn't have to take you as long as it took me, because I was really figuring a lot of this out, like by trial and error in myself for a while. But it was deciding what I want in my mind, in my life, and in my inner being. And this is something that I'll talk about again later, what I'm no longer available for. And that is one of the key practices that I wanted to share with you tonight. My art schoolers can chime in, but I think it's often one of their favorite things, or something that gets, a tool that gets used often, is what are you going to decide that you're no longer available for? And so for me, I was no longer available for the kind of thoughts and energy and conversations with others, but mostly myself, which create feelings of pressure, which would move my body into a state of survival and fight or flight or freeze or fawn, rather than a creative state. And so that is one of the ways of being that I focus on myself and with my art school clients, is cultivating like the physiology, the biology of a creative state. And pressure, a right amount of pressure is actually conducive to creativity. But I'm assuming the kind of pressure that you're talking about is the kind of pressure that makes everything shut down, that actually shifts your central nervous system into a place where you can't actually access, but you can't biologically access your higher functions of thought. You can't access your imagination because it's survival. You only are limited to like the big three: time, space, and your body. And that's just, evolution working. So I wanted to work, I knew also from sports psychology that an optimal performance state is not a state where you're like, oh, so scared and can't access like flow. So what I was really excited about, as an artist was like, I'm like, look at this world of sports. Everybody's got a mindset coach. Everybody's got a meditation coach. Like all the greatest athletes have their mindset coach, have their meditation coach. They have obviously their physical trainers. You know, a lot of them have like spiritual mentors or coaches, because they know that that's like that inner game, which helps them access flow and helps them, you know, flow their gifts and flow their genius in their particular sport. Like, why don't we do this in other areas of life? And for sure, why don't we do this with artists? Like, think of all of the genius that is within people and gets bound up with, you know, it's that paradigm, you know, of the tortured artist. Like, that is such a mythos that we don't need to subscribe to. And I decided that was a thing. I was not going to be available for that. And instead, I wanted to build a paradigm of the thriving artist. I wanted to build the paradigm of the extraordinary, cultivating an extraordinary way of being. So mindset, emotional wherewithal, health, physicality, and robust spirit. And extraordinary, not in a sense of elitism, but extraordinary in the sense of like, isn't it amazing that this is what we're capable of, humans? And that actually a creative state, you're relaxed, you're at home in yourself, like, and you're at home in the universe, and you can flow what's yours to flow. So, Margaret, I'm not sure if this would help you specifically, but one thing that I have found tremendously helpful, and I was afraid of doing this because I was afraid that it would mean like the opposite of achieving my dreams. But I've done a podcast on this too, and I talk about lowering your standards to elevate your art. And there are many ways that you can do that. But for me, like lowering and realizing that really a lot of my standards were actually set from a place of scarcity and from fear and not trusting myself, of feeling like that I had to be on defense in the world, and that if I didn't show up perfect with everything tied up in a bow all the time, that I would never make it. And I've actually found the reverse to be true, that the more I can allow myself to settle back into myself, to come as I am, and to trust in any given moment that I don't need to apologize for that, to trust that the more I just let my creativity flow in whatever form that is, and I allow it to be many forms, by the way. That's another way to kind of come in through the side door around that inner critic that tries to, you know, it's like check you at the door and bounce you. Creativity, like let it flow in many ways. If you are a painter and you're feeling like you're feeling too much pressure to go into the studio, try gardening for a while. If you are a writer and you're like just on lockdown, start writing letters, right? Look, one of my inroads, one of the ways that I decided that I could use as like in my mind to build up that I did have a background in creativity was that all my life, I loved looking at beautiful architecture magazines and interior design magazines to see the art in them. And I'm like, I have a lifetime of looking at art, because I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't grow up going to all these New York City museums even. I'm like, I've been looking at what makes things beautiful, and I've been admiring beauty my whole life. I've been seeing, so I trained myself to look for all the ways that could support that. And I want to say, so it's actually like just good timing. When I'm talking about how to take the pressure off, like know that any small step on behalf of your creativity is like a step of radical love and courage, and that it absolutely adds up. I tell my students to think of this as every time you do something on behalf of your creative spirit and on behalf of your creative dream or any dream, think of it as you've just made an energetic deposit in your energetic ATM. And it builds up and it builds up and it builds up. And over time, it compounds and it compounds. So it becomes cumulative and it compounds. And so I just today happened to pick up like the first painting I ever made after law school. I took my art teacher grandma's inherited art supplies, and I put up a studio in our grad student garage basement. And I was like, I'm just going to try. I'm just going to go for it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to go for it. And I had a picture that I tore out of a Ballard Designs magazine that had a painting of poppies in it. I'm like, oh no, seemed like a good way to start. So I actually got it framed because I thought I always had it in my studio, and I just picked it up today and they framed it for me. Because that piece to me is like so special, and one of the most important pieces I did because it was the first one. And it was also like the one where, you know, people said, oh, you're gonna be an artist and you're not gonna apply to that firm, and oh, and they looked at it and they're like, oh, there's a lot of that. And I just decided this is so dear to me. And I will look back on this someday and be like, thank you. Thank you for being brave. And thank you for just going for it. So whatever step you can take, and then also this practice of becoming unavailable for the things that create pressure, and on purpose cultivating the things that instead give you buoyancy and nourish your spirit.
Leah, I want to be conscious of time. We have about 20 minutes left, and I know you have some other topics that you want to share. There was also another question in the chat about this transition process and how you managed through it, but I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about spaciousness and dropping the drag first and then come back to that.
Yes, please remind me of that, because I love that.
I will. So let's talk about spaciousness.
Okay, so I talked about, you know, creating the importance of creating a container, and that creativity and magic love a container. And so what I have found with myself and with working with so many artists, and particularly women, that spaciousness is not talked about enough, that we are really trying to create from a depleted place. We are trying to create in the remains of the day. We are trying to make it work. We are trying to nickel and dime our creative dreams, and still feeling guilt about it in the process. We are trying to, as I have heard from some of my clients in the beginning, we are trying to earn our oxygen. And that needs to change. That I will not stand for. To me, it's an affirmation from the writer Jungian Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and she states, you know, I love my life more than I love cooperating with my creative oppression. And I share that in the context of creating spaciousness, because one of the most neglected aspects I find that is really low-hanging fruit, one of the reasons why so many creatives, and in particular women, are struggle to create results, or struggle to access their creativity, is because a lack of spaciousness in their life. And spaciousness, I want you to consider it very broadly. Like spaciousness in terms of, just to Margaret's point, taking the pressure off of yourself, taking the pressure off the dream, not using the goal or the dream against you, like really giving yourself grace to be a beginner and to move through a process. Spaciousness means, yes, massive amounts of failure, like quote unquote failure, are absolutely the foundations of your castle. Like there is no way that you can accumulate the kind of wisdom you desire, or the kind of creativity, like creative work, development, money, relationships, anything, without allowing yourself courage and spaciousness to show up in the world as you are. And so a way to also, that I want to make this very concrete, is it can be physical. Like, is there a space on your calendar? Is there, and not just space, but spaciousness? Because again, to that question of pressure, I am so passionate about abandoning, not being available for that paradigm, creating a paradigm for women where we are not available for overexerting, forcing, straining, overthinking, pushing ourselves, like basically doing violence to ourselves. And part of that to me is creating spaciousness in your life. Like, do you have space to actually be nurtured? Is there space? Someone was asking about a support system. That can be spaciousness too. Do you have space in your life for the kinds of people and conversations and inputs and influences that nurture your soul and feed your spirit? Or again, are you kind of just trying to eke by and get by? And what I have found is a lot of times it's been so long, if ever, that we've actually experienced what it feels like to be full and overflowing, because we're really conditioned to run on fumes and to just get by. And it can seem in the beginning like that you have to do that. And then sometimes I've been very scrappy on my journey, like very scrappy. But along the way, I've really had to take a hard look at where I was coming from. Like, it was all my own doing that I was coming from scarcity, because I just wasn't giving myself enough spaciousness. And, at the heart of everything I'm doing too, it is really about like honoring your dream and loving yourself, and that being like your North Star. Because if you were the guardian, let's say, of a child, and someone said, this child is a great gift, they have a great dream, you're going to be the custodian, you are the steward of this human spirit and of this creative potential. Like, wouldn't you be like, get them the teachers, get them the students, get them the art supplies, let them burn through art supplies? Because one thing I hear a lot of people saying is like, I don't want to waste. And it's just, that's not the waste, right? It's not the waste. The waste would be that you think like not giving yourself that investment in your life and your dream. The waste is like your spirit and your dream going unexplored. So asking yourself, what kind of spaciousness is your creativity asking for? How can you be the steward of your creativity and provide it with the kind of spaciousness, breathing room? And again, whether that's more than enough space on your calendar, or whether that is actual physical space, an adequate space, mental space, emotional space, spiritual. You can turn this so many ways. I find that question is like multifaceted and yields a lot of different answers, but always the perfect one for the precise person asking it. And here's the last thing that I want to say about spaciousness, is it is also like an underrated aspect of creativity, because I think it's a very feminine approach to creativity. Creating a space where you can receive, and that part of the creative process is creating a vessel and clearing the channel so that you can receive. So much of the emphasis on our creativity is about the do, is about the make, is about the produce. And I love that too. I'm not saying you have to abandon that, not at all. But that can't happen in a truly inventive, innovative, capital C, creative way without having cleared space to be still and clear and receive. And again, I think that is an underrated part of creativity. Part of what I hear from a lot of people is because we have a judgment about ourselves if we're not constantly producing, that there can be a lot of guilt, there can be a lot of anxiety about, oh no. But it is such an important aspect of creativity, is really practicing this receptivity, being a receiver and taking things in and allowing yourself the spaciousness to do that. So I want to pause there, Monica, before I move on to the third.
I think go ahead and go into dropping the drag, and then we'll ask questions with whatever remaining time there is.
Okay, all right, thank you. So dropping the drag and nurturing the numinous. We talked a little bit already about dropping the drag. I like to think sometimes like in principles of physics, and also this applied to me when I was an athlete. One of the things you do, like you can only effort so much. And after a while, you have to look for like what's holding you back. As a swimmer, changing your position, your body position in the water is huge in terms of improving your performance as a swimmer. And so if you think of this in terms of your creativity and in terms of your psyche, where are you carrying a lot of bulk? Where are you carrying, like with your psyche, a lot of things that are creating unnecessary drag? Because again, so much of what I hear from people when they're trying to bridge that gap between, okay, here's what I'm imagining, how do I create it? It's so hard to create it. How come I can't get there without nearly killing myself? It doesn't have to be that way. So what I want you to ask yourself, like, this is so exciting because it's not about working harder. It's about looking for those things that you can let go of. So I, mentioned this earlier with what are you no longer available for? And a question that I want to share with you that can be so powerful is if you think about your dream, your future self, like living that dream, and you think about where you are now, that comma, that space between, there is some transformation that you have undergone. So go to your future self and study her. Like, how is she lighter? What is no longer in her mind? What no longer takes up mental real estate, emotional real estate? What no longer is like psychic, and I just mean of your psyche, baggage for her? Because if you learn the places where you have that sort of baggage weighing you down and you learn how to drop it and be no longer available for it, we talk about this in terms of like in neurobiology, in terms of like inhibiting. You learn to inhibit these patterns, and it is a practice and it is a training. It's why I designed the art school. I liken it to being akin to like Olympic training. We're not just learning concepts. I want you to train because it's necessary to train in order to rewire your brain. You can't just learn about lifting a weight. You actually have to do the reps. And it's the same with rewiring your brain and cultivating your emotional mastery and the kind of robust spirit that you want. It takes attention and training and focus and repetition and awakeness and coming back in order to rewire yourself, recondition yourself to be that sort of spirit that flows creativity more freely. And part of that is learning how to inhibit old patterns of thought and emotion and response that before were really weighing you down. And then on the other side, nurturing the numinous. This is similar to spaciousness. It is also exciting because it's not about you trying to like eke blood out of a stone every time you go to create. It's about how can you become so nourished and so alive, so full of creative energy that you just can't help but be prolific. You just can't help but have an energy that flows out into the world and that is magnetic. And another Clarissa Pinkola Estes teaching that I love and that I use in the art school is serving the non-rational, because this is awesome for nurturing that feminine creative spirit, serving the non-rational. So all of those desires that you have that you're like, okay, I keep wanting to dance, but really what does that have to do with my entrepreneurial venture? I'm using an example from my real life and an example I've heard from clients, but it keeps coming up. I want to dance. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm already busy. I've got a podcast. I've got paintings. I've got a business. I'm like, but you want to dance. So I started to dance, and lo and behold, like it completely changed how I market my business. And not to mention, so dang fun. And so the ripple effects, right, are infinite. But nurturing the numinous, serving the non-rational, giving space in your life to those dreams and desires that you've been kind of sidelining and like, someday I'll get to you, and instead bringing them all in and honoring those as very valid aspects of nurturing your creativity, nurturing your creative work, whether that be as an artist or whether that be as a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a parent. It will absolutely, you will reap the benefits of that, as will everyone else in your life. and it's so fun. It feels almost like you were cheating. Monica, do you have a question, or how are we?
I think that's wonderful. We're coming to the end. I want to make sure we have a chance for a few questions, and I also want to highlight something before we close. One of the questions that was asked was, did you start taking painting classes or training before the first poppy painting or after, once you decided to make space to explore the passion?
I did later take some painting classes. I audited a college class and I took some community classes. That's a great question, because I think the most important thing about those classes, what they taught me, was the importance of creating space and the importance of structure. Because at that time I had small children. When I finally did sign up for classes, I had like babies, and I was trying to do it when they napped, late at night, early in the morning, and going away to a studio. Like, it taught me how valuable it was to have my own time and my own space and structure. That was like creating a container.
That's wonderful. And then, when you did make that transition from being a lawyer, are there certain support systems that you were able to leverage in order to make that transition? And, where did you build that trust muscle to support yourself?
It was really it had to be done internally first. What I discovered, like, my husband is super supportive now, like wildly supportive. Like, he's actually right now took the children to Salsa's for a late dinner, and they were like, "What? 8 o'clock? We're on East Coast time. 8 o'clock dinner at Salsa's on a school night? What?" Like, but we arrived here. Like, this was part of our journey. I had to discover how to lead my creative life with my own belief in myself, because he has his PhD in accounting and is also a farm kid. He was like, "You want to do what? With that painting, you're going to do what? And we have student loans and a mortgage." And he just didn't, but I had to learn that that's his worldview, and his thoughts were not about me. His thoughts were about his worldview. And I needed to really, from within me, build a deep love and a conviction. And I learned to lead my own life that way. And with time, I also was a leader, co-partner in our marriage that way. But we definitely had to navigate and work through some things.
Well, I have had a sideline view to your growth over the last, 8 or 9 years now. And it's been so wonderful to see you flourish as an artist and represent that belief system and help lift so many other artists. One of the things I'm super proud of for you is that tomorrow is the release of your first published book. Do you want to just share a quick tidbit before we close tonight?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, so tomorrow, my book, it's called Wild Blue Yonder, is officially released, and it's a collection of poetry and also creative prompts, which I also call imagination meditations. And what I want to most share from that is the spirit with which I did the book, because it's on point with a lot of the questions that have been asked, and it really on point with what I'm talking about, creating your dreams on your own terms. I created this book on my own terms. Like, it's not like any other poetry book. I wanted it to be true to me. I wanted it to be true to the work that I do. And it also, like, I loved the process. Like, I absolutely, and I let it come together. And if you, here is one last thing that I want to share, that there are times when things are difficult and you need to flex all of those muscles, for sure. And also this mantra of, it also gets to be simple, and it also gets to be fun. And that has been those two things have been such a guidepost for me through times that were difficult and trying. I would ask myself, how can I make this simple? And how can I make this fun? And that helped me birth my art career, my coaching career, and then this book that comes out tomorrow.
That's exciting. Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation with Leah as much as I did. We'll send out some follow-up notes the conversation was recorded. Go to Amazon or your favorite book place to check out The Wild Blue Yonder. Go to the art school to check out the podcast, as well as other events that Leah is hosting. Really, thank you for sharing from your heart and spirit and soul. And I think you have inspired the creative in all of us tonight. Thank you, Leah.